Welcome to Marketing Matters with WEO Media. I have with me today Austin Hunter, who is the CEO founder of Ascend Strategic Partners. Thank you for being with us, Austin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. As we have had the opportunity to talk, we clearly have so much to explore about the type of consulting that you offer and this whole specific area that you specialize in, which is in transition, helping a practice prepare for the eventual exit.
Mhm.
Because they're going to exit one way or the other. They're either going to die or they're going to sell their practice or they're going to sell to a DSO or who knows who they'll sell to, but
Mhm.
there's going to be an end game. In my experience as a consultant, that always seemed so far away that it was never a topic of conversation. And it probably should have been much sooner than we ever really considered. I think we'd love to explore with you what critical insights do we need to have about what it takes to sell a practice. If you're up for that, let's spend some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking forward to getting started and being able to discuss this topic today. And like you said, it's never too early. And I think that's really the important thing here is that even if you think that you're 10 years away from retirement or whatever a transition might look like for you, it's important to start understanding what that looks like today and really
Yeah.
to start to educate yourself on, what's going to go into that process. How far in advance do I need to think about these things? And really just
Yeah.
prepare yourself as best as possible so that you can have the greatest outcome for yourself.
Also, I think as I've watched over the years, based on my experience, I think it's fair to say that that conversation needs to happen earlier than before. Realistically, there's a lot more preparation that
Mhm.
goes into selling a practice than maybe was the case 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more to consider now than there was before.
Mhm.
When you're looking at valuations, we'll talk about that, and maybe some common hiccups that you see as you're working with a practice that invariably, I'll bet 9 times out of 10, they're probably waited too long. They wish they would have started sooner, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yep.
Or they never really thought about selling the practice, but something happened, or they decided that there's an appealing enough offer that they're going to do it sooner than later. But now they've wasted a lot of time, a lot of valuable time that they could have taken advantage of had they known. So we've established the fact that it's probably never too early. But why is that the case? Why is it never too early to prepare for the sale of your practice?
You really have to start at the end goal and kind of work backwards. So, a lot of groups today, a lot of DSOs, they're going to require you to work for another 3 to 5 years post sale. So if you're looking at, hey, I want to retire in 5 years, you really need it to be selling and working and selling your practice today, just so you are able to work out that employment agreement with your new partner and making sure that you're not leaving any money on the table by having to, or wanting to retire early. When you start working backwards and you say, okay, I'm going to have to work 3 to 5 years with this new partner. And then before that, it can really take anywhere from 6 to 12 to 24 months to really get your practice ready to go to market and to actually sell. And so that's why it's, super important in my mind to really start to consider this early and often, what a transition might look like for you and really what the best outcome in your mind, what that looks like, whether it's, simply based on the highest dollar value that you can unlock, or whether it's a partner that's able to help you grow for the last 3 to 5 years of your clinical time and really just help you unlock the most that you can. You spend so much of your time building this, what's the equivalent of like your baby. You can spend decades building this practice, building your brand, building your image in your community. And that's where I think it's important that, in honor to, respect what you've built and really be granted full credit for everything that you've put, blood, sweat, and tears into. You want to give yourself the best possible chance and outcome to achieve what is, your ultimate outcome. And so, really starting to think about it potentially 7 years, 8 years, even further off and, in advance of when you might either be wanting to retire or transition and do something else, just so that you have the time to get your practice where it needs to be, get it fully set up and ready for a sale, get things cleaned up, whether it's, financials that you've been needing to get on top of, or, maybe it's, some new marketing piece that you want to try out and really try and boost your numbers for 12 months before you go, get ready for a sale, really just giving yourself that time to fully explore what it's going to take and what it's going to look like so that you're fully educated when the time comes. And it's obviously not small dollars that we're talking about either. So it
Right.
really just emphasizes how important it is to be thinking about this early and often, and to, not be afraid to have a conversation, even if you're 5, 10 years out. Hey, what does the market look like?
Hmm.
What can I be
Hmm.
doing right now to get myself ready? What does, the whole transition process look like of selling my practice from getting started to, having a conversation with a broker like myself? And then what, the actual diligence process and deal processes to get to close. So just a lot of things to really consider. And I think there's a big piece that, I think is lacking in the space is, really solid education about the process and what things can look like so that we're equipping owner doctors to be able to make the best possible decisions. And so part of the reason why, I think this is great today is so that we can get on and talk about these things and hopefully, spark some ideas in some people's heads to get them thinking about the right topics, the right questions that they need to be asked
Right.
so that they're ready for a
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah. Let's do that. Can you walk us through what that process looks like for selling a practice? What decisions need to be made, considering the concept of beginning with the end in mind?
Mhm.
Which, if you think it's so far out there, it's not even worth considering or
Mhm.
entertaining right now, we don't go there when in fact we probably should. So
Mhm.
maybe understanding what that process is helps us better understand what we need to consider or be prepared for.
Yeah. So if you were to, let's just play this out. If you were to come to me today and say, "Hey, look, I'm ready to sell my practice. What does that look like from today forward?" And really start to break that down. So if we were to get started today, we have a standard set of information that, myself and every other broker is going to request, gathering your financials, gathering PMS reports, all of that, kind of standard set of information so that we can start to understand what your practice looks like, understand what your EBITDA is, which is super important, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and really start to build a picture of what the value of your practice is with a valuation model. And so that we can help at that point have a conversation with you and say, hey, given the market dynamics, here's where we think your practice is going to be worth. Here's the range. Here's, some of the key things that you need to know about the process. And really from that point forward, it's understanding what their goals are to get out of it. And that's sometimes not, as easy as just one conversation. It could be multiple, it could
Oh,
be, a
sure.
couple dinners. I mean, it's a very important thing that from our perspective, we want to make sure that that's front of mind basically the entire time. And so once we have that valuation ready to go, we'll get some marketing materials together and really just get ready to take you to market. Be able to position your practice in a obviously favorable way so that, the buyers that are out there in the space are super interested and, are excited to be a partner with you for, what the next 3 to 5 years look like. And so, it's almost like a speed dating process. So, you're starting to meet some of the buyers and, it's really important for you to keep in mind, what does a potential partnership look like? And, can I, basically put up with this person for the next 3 to 5 years? And, you obviously want it to be better than put up with. You should be
For
super
sure.
excited and
Yeah.
happy with, the home that you find. And so kind of the pre going to market timeline is, call it anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, anywhere in between there. Just depends on, how quickly we can gather materials together, have some of these conversations. So really about a month to two of getting ready to go to market if you're ready today. And then once you're in market, and, this can vary with a number of different reasons, can take in, usually about a month once you're in market to set up initial conversations with buyers so that they can, understand you, understand your practice, what you're looking to get out of it. And then they can start to do their own diligence on their end so that they can understand, hey, this is what we're willing to offer for a practice like this. And so once that happens and, let's say you found your perfect partner, and you're ready to move forward with them, you would sign something that's called a LOI, letter of intent. And that way that just gives, exclusive rights together, the buyer and the seller, that you're willing to move forward under these, arrangements and with this valuation in mind. And that process from then on can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months. It's important during that time to understand that there's going to be a lot of work that's involved. Just because you get to the LOI and that you get one signed and you're moving forward with a buyer, the work doesn't stop there. It unfortunately gets even more so. There's a lot of work that comes once you're under LOI. And really that's all centered around making sure that once you close that this new partnership and when you guys come together, that it's as smooth and seamless as possible. And so, really good buyers that are in the space are really focused on, the fact that there should not be a difference for your staff and for your patients, day one when it closes. There might be some small differences for the staff in terms of like, there might be a different credit card processing machine that they have to use or, little things
Sure.
like that. But there really
Right.
shouldn't be an impact to your everyday life and to your everyday practice. And so really all in all, when you start to consider what this timeline looks like, if you're ready to hit go today, it can still take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Once we get started to actually selling your practice, you kind of look at this timeline again. And if most places are, requiring you to work 3 to 5 years after that, you're potentially looking at 6 years down the line where you're still working. Whether you're ready for retirement now or, in 6 years from now, that time moves fast and it'll start to creep up on you really fast.
You mentioned valuation. How are dental practices valued? Given the number of structures you could entertain, what's typical? What do you generally see?
So valuation is all based on profitability or EBITDA. And once again, that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And really that's the profit of your practice. And there's obviously things that, when that number gets calculated and adjusted, personal items that you're running through your business, like there will obviously be adjustments that come to that so that you're not being deemed for, running, a profitable and a small business essentially. If we were, to, as an example, say, your practice EBITDA comes out to 300,000 and you get paid a 5 times multiple on that, your practice will be valued around $1.5 million. Really the whole space works off of a multiple of EBITDA. And so that's why it's, in my mind, super important that, if you're a couple of years out, even from wanting to sell your practice, making sure that your financials are truly in order and, you're in line with industry margins. So your EBITDA is, where we would expect it to be based on the type of practice, the size, the geography, all of those factors, and making sure that you are getting, what you're supposed to. And in terms of offers, so, that number 1.5 million, for example, you're not going to get all of that in just cash. The way that deal structures exist in the space today, there's a number of different, structures that, will change from group to group, but a majority of them will rely on a couple key things. One is cash. So you're going to receive as a portion of your deal, you are going to receive cash and that'll be, directly wired to you at closing. Another piece that you can receive is equity in the DSO. Some people refer to it as holdco equity. There's a number of different names that are out there, but think of it as, you're owning a stock basically. It's obviously a private stock, but you're owning stock in this DSO. And so you, along with every other partner doctor that's in there, have a vested interest in, the positive outcome of that DSO. It can be anywhere from, I would say 10 to 30% of your offer. And so that's where it's super important to find what you believe is the best partner for you and also
Mm.
one that you think is going to be successful in the long run. Those are real dollars that are being tied up in, the equity of the DSO. The other piece that you can get is called joint venture or JV equity. And this is really, think of it as, this percentage. And once again, this could be anywhere from 10 to 30%. As well, depending on a number of factors. This is the percentage that you still own in your practice. And so what's interesting about this is that you will typically receive distributions alongside the company or the DSO. And so you'll receive these distributions based on your profitability. This can be anywhere from monthly to quarterly, biannual. It really varies from group to group, but this joint venture equity also gives you the ability to cash out down the line. And so that's why it's, super important that you're alongside of the DSO and invested in your practice best interest still as well as the DSOs. There will also be holdbacks or earnouts. Holdback is where, they might set aside 10% of the total value, pay that out at the end of year one, for example, and just say, hey, as long as you maintain the same level of profitability in your practice for that first year, you will receive this money. And it's really just a hedge for them that fortunately a lot of people have been burned in the past where, you go and buy a practice and, someone decides, hey, this is the equivalent of my retirement. I'm going to pull my foot off the gas. And so, this is basically a way to quasi protect against that. And then earnouts are something that's interesting as well. Gives you the ability to make more money down the line. And so an earnout is if you hit a set goal in terms of profitability, or maybe it's collections in your practice, they'll pay you out even more. And those structures can vary, a lot. Really, those are kind of the key pieces of what, a structure of an offer will look like. So it'll be anything from cash, holdco, JV, equity, potentially a foldback, and potentially an earnout. A lot of important pieces there. And obviously, we're kind of just breezing through this. So I know there's a lot of questions that can come up. It's always interesting when you start to get offers in for a practice that you're selling, and really making sure that, if you're in the process today and you're selling your practice, finding a way to put, each of these offers on kind of an apples to apples comparison so that you can truly understand, one, what your practice value is today, but also, what does that value and what are you potentially going to earn over the next 5 years? Because that's also really important.
It really is, isn't it? And what determines the multiple? Is that just market demand at the time, or?
Yeah, so it can be a number of things. It can be, a lot of it is, I would say based off of your EBITDA of your practice. So, it'll kind of be if you're between, 500 and $1 million, it'll be, X multiple. If you're above $1 million, it'll be X multiple. It kind of, falls into a little bit of a bucket, but at the same time, there's a lot of other factors that can cause someone to, increase that offer and increase that multiple. One is a competitive bidding process. So, if you go out to market and, you go to 10 buyers, for example, and they're all interested in your practice, well, it's almost like selling your house. You wouldn't just show your house to one person and take whatever they're going to offer. You would love to have multiple offers on the table to help drive the price up a little bit. So
Yeah,
that'll
yeah.
be a factor. Market can sometimes be a factor, depending on where the practice is located. If they're, a general practice, a specialty, those can affect it. Just a number of things that come into play. But one of the most important things is just making sure that you are indeed creating that competitive bidding structure so that, you're able to have the most options on your side of the court so that you have the ability to say, hey, I really love this partner. This is who I want to go with. But at the same time, we're leaving money on the table with this offer. And being able to use those to really help you get what you want, I think is important.
You're describing a really time-consuming investment for a
Mhm.
dentist who's already busy doing what he does as a dentist. I can't
Mhm.
imagine a dentist ever really being able to do all of that on their own and still
Mhm.
keep their head above water. I mean, that's a lot to consider. Your role then becomes very much like a consultant as well as an agent, a real
Mhm.
estate agent, if you will, on
Mhm.
how you're going to transition and get the best deal possible and what that looks like. And that makes sense to me.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's spot on. And it's good to have someone on your side that's fighting on your behalf. Because at the
Yeah.
same while you're going through this process, you're still seeing patients, you're still working a normal day, and it is exhausting. And unfortunately, you will get deal fatigue going through this process. It's a lot of work, but at
Yeah.
the same time, it should hopefully be really worth it in the end for yourself because, you've spent decades building this practice, building this brand, and you deserve to get what are going to get out of this practice and deserve,
Yeah.
whatever your ultimate goal is to achieve that.
And it sounds like if we waited until the last minute,
Mhm.
that could be far more stressful because we feel forced into making decisions we wish we didn't have to make right away. If there was a different pace to that exit and that transition, that really puts the doctor in a much more powerful position to not have to decide right now.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's also important. Unfortunately, things can happen, things can pop up, whether it's a,
Sure.
a health scare or something else that, could eventually prevent you from practicing. And so making sure that you have a plan in place and understand, hey, if something were to happen to me, what would happen to my practice? And, unfortunately, a lot of situations that I've run across where there is no plan in place. There's no associate doctor that's there and that's able to help pick up some of the workload. Starting to think about these things and will really help you long term. And also, if you're not waiting, let's say in the instance where you do wait and you're kind of backed up against, the wall in terms of timing and selling your practice, that can also have a negative effect on the value that you'll get for your practice.
Yeah,
And
I can
so
see
let's
that.
say, you can only work for 2 or 3 years. Unfortunately, you're not going to get the same amount for your practice that you would, if you're staying, a little bit longer. From a buyer's perspective, there's just things that they'll have to do to mitigate and to make sure that the practice will continue operating at the same profitability and the same level that it was in the past. And so,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we run across a lot of these instances where I would say, a doctor has potentially waited too long and their options for buyers is limited and the value that they're getting for their practice is also limited as well. So,
Yeah.
once again, it's almost like you plan for your own retirement in terms of, investing in, retirement funds and all that stuff. It's the same thing. It's something that, you do have to be thinking about early and often and really starting to create a plan for yourself and what that might look like for you.
I had more than one general dentist client who, in their 40s, in their late
Mhm.
40s, one was early 50s, the prime of their career,
Mhm.
not thinking about retirement, were diagnosed with one was Parkinson's,
Mhm.
one was something else that it was a game changer. And that immediately put them at a disadvantage because, they didn't want anyone to know. That's why they were selling. But clearly that put them at a disadvantage because that's an unfortunate situation. But every time I saw it happen, it was a surprise that they weren't prepared for.
Yep, and that's, ultimately what I, hope at the end of the day if someone watches this podcast is that, they just maybe take, 10 minutes this weekend and think about, hey, if something, were to happen or, what does my retirement look like and just, start to just at least jog those thoughts and those
Right.
ideas in their head so that, they're not caught off guard because, life is short, a lot of things happen. And I think it's important that you protect what could be your biggest investment in your life, and making sure that you and your family get exactly what you deserve out of it.
That's one mistake that I just happen to have experienced more than once. You've probably seen many more. We've talked about, a couple of misconceptions there. What are some mistakes that you frequently see dentists make regarding the timing of selling their practice?
Yeah, I think we've kind of touched upon it already, but a lot of people think that hey, I'll sell when I'm going to retire. That's one that I think we've touched upon where they might be able to sell their charts to someone local or sell to another dentist, but really if your mindset is I'll sell when I'm ready to retire, you're realistically leaving a lot of value that you built in your practice on the table. Another common misconception is, selling means that, you're going to quit immediately. We've touched upon this already, but most buyers are going to require you to sign an employment agreement that's anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Really what you need to be thinking about is not, when I retire and, I'll be done. And it's really, hey, we're going to have to work another solid, potentially 5 years and, potentially even more if you're really excited about where you're at and, your practice is moving in the right direction. But there's obviously a transition period and you will have to work quite a bit of years after that. Another, I think, common misconception is that, hey, I can decide that I'm ready to sell tomorrow and can be in the market in 2 weeks and have a potential buyer really quickly after that. What it takes, time wise to fully get a practice ready for market to go find the right buyers. I mean, it's a couple of month long process, and that's really to make sure that one, your business is being valued where it should be, and two, making sure that we're bringing in all the right buyers and potential partners for you. Really leaving no stone unturned. While you think it could be a quick and easy process, if you really want to do it the right way, it takes some time. I think that's important that I think people understand that it does take time.
But with your involvement, I want to believe that in your help and assistance professionally with the doctor,
Mhm.
that you're able to help the doctor insulate the team from a lot of this turmoil.
Yeah.
And nothing could be more devastating to their production and morale than to see all of these individuals paraded in and out of the office
Mhm.
at times when they're there. So there's certainly a level of confidentiality that
Mhm.
needs to be respected. And if the doctor's doing this on his own, I can't imagine how that's even possible. That's a lot of gymnastics. But you're able to keep this on a more professional, confidential level, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's, I think, super important too, what you alluded to, making sure that, the staff and, operations continue to go as they normally do. I think what's actually really nice about, the current buyer universe today is that everyone is super respectful of that. And they want to make sure that they are, working for you at that point, and they're really working to get you an offer, and they're not there to interrupt your business today or really ever. What's important to them is to make sure that they're following your lead in terms of, when it's time to tell your staff, when it's time to tell your associates, and really being as confidential as possible. Because at the end of the day, let's say worst case, you go down the process with someone and it just doesn't work. The last thing that you want is for your staff to have known about that, and then you don't end up having a deal, and that can affect everything from seeing patients to patient volume to potentially people leaving.
Staff turnover for sure.
There's a number of things that can come up that they want to make sure that they're as private and as confidential as possible. And I think another thing too is that we make sure that we're there on your behalf and we're there working for you. And so we want to make sure that we're taking everything to protect you against whether it's something that a buyer is trying to do or any number of things, and really just be there as a resource for you as well to help you through this process and to make sure that you're protected through this whole thing. And so is your staff and in your operations. Even if either side were to say, hey, this isn't working out, there's no material impact to your business today. And I think that's really important.
Oh, I think that's critical. You're right, Austin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like as you are bringing potential buyers to the table, that the predominant mix are DSOs today, or are you bringing other private potential buyers that are sole proprietors like themselves?
I would say a majority of what we deal with are DSOs and dental organizations. There's a lot of kind of names out there for a DSO. There's a IDSO, which is an invisible DSO. There's DPO, which is dental partnership organization. Really, they're all realistically structured very similarly. There's obviously going to be differences between, what kind of support services that they offer and what kind of ownership looks like, in the DSO, DPO, IDSO. Those things can be different, but we predominantly work with DSOs on the buy side. And really, that's, I would say, a factor of valuation. So, if you were to sell to another provider, another dentist that's in your area, you're not going to get the same value that you would from partnering with the DSO. And that really goes back to kind of like the key components of an offer. One, just generally, they're going to pay more. They have more capital. They have basically deeper pockets. But then two, some of the, second, what we'll call a second bite of the apple in terms of, the whole co equity. So, when that DSO sells, you'll get an increased amount on what your whole co equity is. And then also your JV equity, there's multiple opportunities that exist for you, down the line to, make money on, that equity piece. And so those don't always exist in, if you were to sell to another dental practice owner. It's good to understand the differences between, selling to another practice basically and selling to a DSO.
Well, that's an education process right there. They need to invest time in understanding.
There's a lot to understand, but unfortunately, just a couple bad apples can really sour a whole industry and a whole
Right.
space. When in reality, right now, there are a lot of really good players and people that are focused on the right things and actually supporting, these dental practices once they get them in. It's really unlocked a level of liquidity for these dental practice owners that hasn't existed in the past. 20 plus years ago, even
Mhm.
10 years ago, if you were to sell your dental practice, you are not getting a fraction of what you're able to get today. That additional, liquidity and value for your practice is something that's super important, both, for your hard work that you've put in, once again, your blood, sweat, and tears into your practice for, decades, but then also your retirement and your family as well. It allows you to unlock things that, you haven't even thought of previously, and it makes a meaningful difference.
So what you also have available to you today is a list of former clients and dentists who actually went with DSOs and realized this was actually a really good deal. And I'm glad I did, and I'm happy where I am.
Yep.
That's a different take.
Yeah, absolutely. And that 100% exists out there. And, I think it's important that, when you are considering, going through a process of transitioning your practice and finding a partner and selling to a DSO or another practice, it's really important to, either ask for references or to make phone calls to people that that have partnered with them, and just, ask them honestly what their experience has been like. Because the more that you can, ask these questions and hear experiences from other people, the more it educates you on what you need to look out for and what's going to be important to you in the process. So maybe there's something that a group does that, you're not a fan of. And this is, the beauty of having a broker. You can say, hey, this is
Yeah.
important to me. I don't want this. That way, all your potential buyers are either aware or they're catered to meet that exact, going back again, it's never too early to start thinking about these things and having conversations just to educate yourself once again on,
Right.
on what
Right.
this will look like, and most importantly, what you want out of it.
Because starting earlier allows the dentist, the seller,
Mhm.
to do a level of due diligence he wouldn't normally get a chance to do, wouldn't normally
Exactly.
have a privilege to do or have time to do. That
Yeah,
changes
that's
everything. But
important.
it puts him in a power position. Following a lecture I just recently did in the South, a dentist who was clearly over 60 came up to me and said, I finally decided to bite the bullet and build a website. I said, excuse me, you mean you have not built a website? Prior to now, you've never had a website? He said, yeah. He said, I just never really felt the need. And there really are rural areas in America in which the town is
Mhm.
small enough that everybody knows who you are and you're the only dentist in town or one of, and you haven't really had to do that. Now, obviously, he's missed a lot of understanding and value in what a website can do beyond just, I don't
Mhm.
know, marketing, because we see so many uses that patients appreciate in a website besides just where am I going to go see a dentist. That reminded me of the number of doctors who aren't thinking of a website, sometimes even until they're getting ready to maybe retire, which is like, okay, that's a little late. But at the
Mhm.
same time, that's another one of those areas where if you're really going to impact your valuation, you don't want to start looking at how can I really improve and increase my production and my collections and my overall profitability after I've got a buyer on the table or a potential
Mhm.
offer. You want to be doing that in advance so that you can really maximize your value. And I know that a website certainly makes it more appealing, more saleable. I mean, I can't imagine buying a practice with no website and having that actually value as much as someone who's really managed it well or has a website that they've managed well. There must be other ways that you need to start considering now. What are some other areas you need to consider doing now, regardless of whether you're selling in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, so that actually brings up a great point, and I think one that's important for everyone to understand. Any changes that you're, going to do first and foremost to your practice, whether it's, spending additional marketing dollars on a website and maybe some SEO work, the way that your practice is looked at and ultimately what the value is going to be based off of for EBITDA is going to be off your trailing 12 months. So your latest 12 months of financials. So if you were to do something and just say, hey, it's marketing and it's bringing in an extra 200 new patients a month, and you do this, kind of 2 months before, you're going to sell.
You said additional 200 new patients a month. You mean like
Correct.
that's a lot for a single proprietor. Like even additional 20 patients a month would be a lot.
Yeah.
But I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if that was a mistake or what you meant there.
it just throwing spitballing a number. So if you
Uh-huh.
have, let's say it's a big practice, multiple locations, and you start a
Oh.
marketing campaign that, is really bringing in, a lot of new patients a month, you're going to be valued off of your trailing 12 months. Let's say you have this new, marketing campaign and that's really boosting your collections numbers and, obviously the total patients that are coming in the door. In order for you to get the full credit for that, you need to have that for 12 months. And so
Mhm.
this is why it's important to start considering these things early, because if you do have something that you want to do that you think is either going to let's say reduce costs, so your expenses are lower, or you have something that's going to drive patients in the door and boost your collections, you
Mhm.
realistically need a full 12 months of whatever that is in your financials so that you get full credit for that. That's where it goes back to, early and often, if there are things like, hey, I need to build a website, it's important that, if you're thinking about selling, that new website is realistically going to bring a lot of new patients in the door, especially, in today's day and age, if you haven't had one, just the increased awareness, or maybe it makes it easier to do online bookings, whatever it might be. It's important to have that done early so that you are able to fully maximize, the benefit from that. And then you're able to get valued on what that is. So
Mm.
being able to get a lot of these improvements in place and having a solid 12 months with that will really go a long way in terms of, the value that you'll get. And that's, something that we help clients with all the time. We'll do something called pre-sale consulting. And so we'll work with a practice, we'll go through their financials, we'll give them what their valuation looks like today. We'll compare them to what industry benchmarks are. So we'll look
Okay.
at their cost buckets and their expense buckets and say, hey, this is where, on average, the industry is. And here's some things that you can do to right the ship and fix some of those expenses. There's also things that we can help them deploy in terms of marketing strategies. So working with firms like yourself, how can we help them? Let's say they don't have a website, or they haven't been spending anything on a marketing front. What things can we do to help, boost your revenue and your collections and your new patients to help basically get you on a better footing? And we wrap all that up in a, deliverable that's, hey, here's a playbook for you. If you're really wanting to sell in 2 years, here's what you need to go out and be doing today to really get yourself, where you want to be. And that'll obviously be a conversation that we have too. Hey, what are you looking to get out of it? Or do you have a number in mind?
Yeah.
Whatever it might be, let's understand where you are today, and then let's help you get to where you want to be.
So you mentioned 12 months. If a practice has been stagnant for several years, but
Mhm.
then they begin to grow at, say, 10% a year, and they can do that and maintain that growth over 12, 24 months, that
Mhm.
impacts their value.
Oh, 100%. Yep. It makes a really big impact. You're obviously going to boost your EBITDA number through that growth. But on top of that, everyone loves a growing practice. And so that'll just have, even more buyers, showing up to the table wanting your practice. And it's not always about growth. There are other things that, can play a factor. But if you've shown a proven playbook and how you're growing the business, they're only going to throw gasoline on that fire and help you even more, whether it's, providing better pricing on supplies, or it's better reimbursement rates. It's only going to help. Yeah, that's, I would say, super important.
Oh, that's so helpful, Austin. You've mentioned some of these already, I'm sure, but is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about how you provide guidance and the type of consulting support you offer an eventual practice sale prospect, the doctor? What level of support beyond what you've already shared, which is significant? What other levels of support does Ascend Strategic Partners offer?
Yeah, look, it can be anything from having a conversation. Anyone that wants to reach out and maybe learn a little bit more about what the market looks like today, or maybe they want to understand, what their practice would be valued at today, we can do that free of charge. And that's something that I think kind of plays into this part of, education is, I think, super important. Any way that we can help, educate someone and get them to a place where they're, understanding what can I potentially do down the line, is something that we're willing to do. One of the things that I mentioned is pre-sale consulting. That is a service that we offer where we can help you, let's say you're 12, 24 months out from ready, wanting to sell. What does your practice look like today? And, where do you want to get it to and what can we realistically get it to? And that's like, think of it as, you're getting ready to sell your house. You obviously don't want all your kids' stuff out. You don't want it to be a mess. You want to get it prepped so that it looks nice and that, it presents well when you have people that are, being shown your house. Same thing. Let's get your financials in order. Let's get practice in order. Let's do everything that we need to do so that you're in the best shape possible coming, time for when you're ready to sell. And then the other thing is standard brokerage. So, taking your practice to market, walking you through what all the steps look like, really being there as your partner and, helping you get what you want out of your practice. And obviously, it's not an easy process, like we mentioned, very time consuming, but I think it's really important to have a trusted partner by your side and someone who's looking out for your best interest and not just a paycheck. And, at the end of the day, there's stats that, have been thrown out there, but a brokerage firm will get you 25 to 50% more on the value of your practice than if you were to just go out by yourself and say, hey, here's a DSO, are you interested in buying? They're not incentivized. There's no competitive process at that point. And also it's
Right.
important to have someone that knows the market to make sure that you're not leaving anything on the table. That's
Yeah.
really in a nutshell. Would just, really say that if there's any questions or, if, people have topics they want to discuss, please feel free to reach out. We're always available and, happy to help in any way that we can.
Help us with your contact information there, Austin.
Yep. So my phone number is 813-528-3319. And you can email me at ahunter@ascendantstrategicpartners.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.